The sound of muffled voices drifted through the cracked bedroom door, jolting Zenabou awake. She lay still, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. It wasn't the first time she'd caught Peter speaking in hushed tones late at night, but tonight felt different. More urgent, more secretive. "You can't tell anyone," Peter murmured, his voice low and tense. "Not even her." Her breath hitched. Her? Did he mean her? She clenched the sheets tighter, fighting the urge to get up and confront him. Instead, she stayed frozen, listening intently as footsteps padded softly down the hallway, fading into silence. Zenabou exhaled sharply, her mind racing. For 3 years, she'd tried to be the perfect wife, to bury her feelings for Ben and focus on building a life with Peter. But lately, cracks had begun to show. His frequent disappearances, the unanswered questions about why they hadn't conceived yet, and now this. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She glanced at Peter's side of the bed, empty and cold despite the humid Nairobi night. Where was he going? And who was he talking to? As dawn broke, Zenabou resolved to uncover the truth. Little did she know, what she would discover would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and family. Zenabou spent the next day replaying the fragments of Peter's whispered conversation in her mind. Her attempts to ask him directly were met with evasive answers. "It's work-related," he said dismissively, kissing her forehead before heading out again. But Zenabou wasn't convinced. That evening, as she sat alone on the veranda sipping tea, her thoughts drifted to Ben. She hadn't seen him much lately. He'd moved out of the guest apartment months ago after landing a job overseas. Yet, his absence left an ache in her chest that never fully healed. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a text from Ben. Asterisk, "How are you holding up?" Asterisk, his timing was uncanny, almost as if he could sense her turmoil. She stared at the screen, tempted to pour out everything, the late-night whispers, the unanswered questions, but stopped herself. What good would it do? Instead, she typed a simple reply. Asterisk, "I'm fine." Asterisk. But she wasn't fine. The weight of unspoken truths pressed down on her like a storm cloud threatening to burst. As night fell, Zenabou couldn't shake the feeling that her marriage was teetering on the edge of something far darker than she could imagine. Over the past few months, whispers had begun circulating among their friends and family. Why hadn't Zenabou and Peter started a family yet? In Nairobi's tight-knit social circles, such delays invited speculation. Some blamed stress. Others hinted at deeper issues. Zenabou overheard snippets during gatherings. Her mother's concerned tone when discussing grandchildren, or a distant aunt suggesting maybe they should consult a doctor. Each comment stung, adding pressure to an already strained relationship. One afternoon, Zenabou confronted Peter. "People are talking, Peter. They're wondering why we haven't." "You know," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Peter sighed, rubbing his temples. "We've been trying, Zena. Sometimes these things take time." His voice carried a note of frustration, but also something else. Guilt? Before she could press further, he changed the subject, leaving her more confused than ever. Unbeknownst to Zenabou, Peter had secretly visited a fertility specialist weeks earlier. The results confirmed what he'd feared most. He was infertile. Devastated, he wrestled with how to break the news to Zenabou. He loved her deeply and knew this revelation would crush her dreams of motherhood, and possibly their marriage. Instead of telling her outright, Peter began distancing himself emotionally, retreating into long hours at work or disappearing for days under the guise of business trips. Meanwhile, Zenabou grew increasingly suspicious. One evening, while tidying his study, she stumbled upon a crumpled receipt from the clinic. Her stomach churned as realization dawned. Confronting Peter that night, she demanded answers. Reluctantly, he admitted the truth, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to lose you," he choked out. "I thought maybe we could adopt, or find another way." Zenabou listened in stunned silence, unsure whether to feel anger, pity, or sorrow. Their future together now felt uncertain, hanging precariously in the balance. Days later, Peter called an impromptu meeting at their home, inviting both Zenabou and Ben. Tension crackled in the air as they gathered around the dining table. Zenabou shot Ben a questioning glance, but he looked just as bewildered. "I need to ask you both for something," Peter began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "After learning I can't father children, I've thought long and hard about our situation. If we want to preserve our family legacy, and give Zenabou the chance to become a mother, I believe there's only one solution." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Ben, I want you to father my children with Zeno." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Zenabou's heart raced as she processed the enormity of his request. Ben's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, then to quiet contemplation. "This will remain a secret between us," Peter continued. "The children will look like me since we share the same bloodline. No one needs to know." As Zenabou stared at the two men in her life, she realized this decision would change everything, and bind them together in ways none of them could foresee. After Peter dropped his bombshell, Zenabou excused herself, retreating to her bedroom to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. How could Peter even suggest such a thing? And yet, part of her understood his desperation, to preserve their marriage, to fulfill societal expectations, to keep their family intact. Meanwhile, Ben paced outside, grappling with his own conflicting feelings. On one hand, the idea of being with Zenabou again ignited a spark of hope, a chance to reclaim what they'd lost. On the other hand, the moral implications weighed heavily on him. Was this betrayal or sacrifice? Later that evening, Zenabou found Ben sitting alone on the balcony. "What do you think?" she asked softly, joining him. Ben hesitated before responding. "It's complicated, Zena. But if it's what you truly want, if it makes you happy, I'll consider it." His words sent a shiver through her. Happy? Could she ever be happy knowing the child she bore would carry secrets too heavy to bear? The days following Peter's proposal were tense and awkward. Zenabou avoided both men, retreating into herself as she wrestled with the implications of their decision, or lack thereof. Could she really go through with this? And what would it mean for her marriage, her relationship with Ben, and her own sense of morality? One afternoon, while sorting laundry, Zenabou overheard Peter on the phone in his study. "Yes, I've spoken to them," he said in a hushed tone. "It's not an easy request, but they'll come around." Her hands froze mid-fold. Was he discussing her? Their situation? Anger bubbled inside her. How could he treat such a life-altering decision so casually? She stormed into his office, demanding answers. "I'm trying to protect us," Peter snapped, defensive. "Do you think I enjoy asking my brother to step into my role? This isn't just about me. It's about giving you the family you deserve." Zenabou recoiled, tears welling up. "But at what cost, Peter? Our trust. My dignity. Your brother's loyalty." Peter sighed, looking defeated. "I don't have all the answers, Zena. But we need to make a choice soon. Time isn't on our side." Ben struggled to focus on anything else after Peter's shocking request. His mind kept drifting back to Zenabou, the way she looked when Peter made the announcement, equal parts horrified and conflicted. He couldn't help but wonder if she still harbored feelings for him. That night, unable to sleep, Ben wandered onto the balcony where they'd shared countless movie nights years ago. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Back then, their connection had been pure, untainted by secrets or obligations. Now, everything felt murky, tangled in webs of guilt and duty. His phone buzzed, a text from Zenabou. "Asterisk, can we talk?" Asterisk. He hesitated before replying. Asterisk, of course. "Where?" Asterisk. Minutes later, they met in the garden, bathed in moonlight. Zenabou looked fragile, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "What do you think we should do?" she whispered. Ben ran a hand through his hair. Honestly, I don't know. All I know is that I care about you, Zena. If this is what you want, if it makes you happy, I'll do it. But I need to be sure it's what you truly want. Zenabou nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. Meanwhile, external pressures mounted. Zenabou's mother called weekly, dropping subtle hints about grandchildren. At your age, dear, time is precious, she'd say, her tone laced with concern. Friends and relatives echoed similar sentiments, fueling Zenabou's anxiety. During a family dinner, her younger sister blurted out, "When are you and Peter going to give Mom some grandkids?" "Everyone's waiting." Zenabou forced a smile, choking down her frustration. Later, alone in her room, she broke down in tears. How could she explain to her family that the issue wasn't laziness or neglect, it was biology? Or worse, that her husband wanted his brother to father their children. Peter found her sobbing and pulled her into his arms. "We'll figure this out together," he promised. But his words offered little comfort. Zenabou knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, not just logistical ones, but emotional scars that might never heal. After weeks of deliberation, Zenabou, Peter, and Ben finally reached a tentative agreement. They decided to proceed with Peter's plan, but only under strict conditions. No one outside their immediate circle would ever know the truth. To the world, Peter would remain the father of Zenabou's children. The trio gathered in the living room one evening to formalize their pact. Peter spoke first, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "This stays between us. Forever." Zenabou nodded, though her heart raced. "And we move forward carefully, one step at a time." Ben added quietly, "For Zena's sake, and the baby's, we stick to the plan. No matter what happens." As they sealed their agreement with solemn nods, none of them realized the ripple effects this decision would create. Secrets, no matter how well guarded, have a way of surfacing when least expected. With the agreement in place, Zenabou and Ben began spending more time together, ostensibly to plan for the future. Each encounter was fraught with unspoken tension, their past attraction simmering beneath the surface. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Zenabou lingered in Ben's apartment longer than intended. As they sat side by side on the couch, reminiscing about old times, Ben reached for her hand. "Are you sure about this, Zena?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. "I don't know anymore. But it's too late to turn back now." Ben leaned closer, his gaze intense. "If we're doing this, we need to be honest with ourselves and each other. I can't pretend this is just about fulfilling Peter's wishes." Before Zenabou could respond, their lips met in a hesitant kiss, reigniting the passion they tried so hard to bury. In that moment, neither could deny the depth of their feelings, or the complications they'd unleashed. The morning after their kiss, Zenabou woke up with a knot in her stomach. What had she done? She replayed the moment over and over in her mind. The way Ben's touch sent shivers down her spine, the way his lips felt against hers. It was wrong, so very wrong, yet it felt achingly right. Ben texted her later that day. *, we need to talk. *. Her heart raced as she replied, *. Okay. Tonight. *. That evening, they met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Nairobi. Sitting across from him, Zenabou struggled to meet his gaze. "Last night. It shouldn't have happened," she began hesitantly. Ben reached for her hand, his expression earnest. "No. But we can't ignore how we feel, Zena. Pretending won't make it go away." Zenabou sighed, tears welling up. "This is supposed to be about giving Peter a child, not rekindling something we lost years ago. Then why does it feel like more than that?" Ben countered softly. They left the cafe without resolving anything, but the unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Their feelings were far from buried. As weeks passed, Zenabou and Ben navigated their new reality with caution. They spent time together under the guise of planning for the future, careful not to raise suspicion. Yet, every stolen glance, every accidental brush of hands, reminded them of the passion simmering beneath the surface. Peter, meanwhile, remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the tension between them. He focused on work, leaving Zenabou and Ben ample opportunity to grow closer. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Zenabou voiced her fears. What if Peter finds out? Or worse, what if someone else does? Ben stopped walking, turning to face her. Then we deal with it. Together. But for now we keep moving forward. For everyone's sake. His reassurance calmed her momentarily, though doubt lingered. Could they really pull this off without destroying everything? Months later, Zenabou gathered enough courage to announce her pregnancy to Peter and their families. The news brought relief, and renewed scrutiny. Friends and relatives flocked to congratulate them, speculating about the baby's arrival and marveling at how much Zenabou glowed. Peter played the role of doting husband perfectly, showering her with affection and gifts. Beneath the surface, however, cracks began to form. Zenabou noticed subtle changes in Peter's behavior, moments of detachment, fleeting looks of sadness when he thought no one was watching. One night, unable to sleep, Zenabou confronted him. "Are you okay, Peter? You seem distant." He hesitated before answering. "It's hard, Zena. Watching you carry my brother's child, it's not easy. But I remind myself it's for the best." His honesty caught her off guard, guilt washing over her. Was she sacrificing too much for the sake of appearances? As Zenabou's pregnancy progressed, tensions within the trio escalated. Ben grew increasingly protective of her, often accompanying her to doctor appointments or stepping in when Peter was unavailable. While Zenabou appreciated his support, she worried about drawing attention. One evening during a family dinner, Peter snapped at Ben for offering to help Zenabou clear the table. "She's my wife," he said sharply. "I'll take care of her." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Zenabou intervened quickly, laughing nervously. "Boys, please. There's no need to fight over me." But the damage was done. Later that night, Zenabou confronted Peter. "Why are you acting like this? Ben is only trying to help." "He's doing more than helping," Peter shot back, his voice laced with bitterness. "Sometimes I wonder if this was a mistake." Zenabou froze, dread pooling in her chest. Had Peter begun to regret their agreement? Despite the growing tension, Zenabou and Ben continued to find solace in each other's company. One rainy afternoon, trapped indoors due to a sudden downpour, they found themselves alone in Ben's apartment. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil brewing inside them. "I can't keep pretending," Ben admitted, pacing the room. "Every time I see you, I want to hold you, kiss you, to tell the world you're mine." Zenabou bit her lip, torn between guilt and longing. "We made a promise, Ben. Peter. To ourselves." "And what happens when promises aren't enough?" he countered, stepping closer. "Zena, I love you. I always have." Before she could respond, he pulled her into a passionate embrace, their lips meeting in desperation. For a brief moment, the world faded away, leaving only the two of them. When the kiss ended, Zenabou whispered, "We can't do this again. It's too dangerous." But even as she said the words, she knew resisting him was becoming harder by the day. Rumors began circulating around Nairobi about Zenabou's pregnancy. Some whispered that the timeline didn't add up, pointing out Peter's frequent absences during the early stages. Others speculated about Ben's closeness to Zenabou, fueling gossip that threatened to expose their secret. One afternoon, Zenabou overheard a group of women discussing her at a market. "She's carrying Peter's child, but doesn't he travel all the time?" one remarked pointedly. "And isn't his brother always around?" Zenabou hurried away, her cheeks burning with shame. That evening, she confided in Ben. "People are starting to talk. If this gets out..." "It won't," Ben assured her firmly. "We'll handle it. Together." Yet deep down, Both feared the walls were closing in faster than they could prepare. One evening, during a family gathering at Peter and Zenabou's home, tensions reached a boiling point. Ben arrived late, his presence immediately drawing attention. As he greeted Zenabou warmly, their lingering hug didn't go unnoticed by Peter, or by a nosy aunt who raised an eyebrow. Such affection between brother-in-law and sister-in-law, the aunt remarked slyly. It's almost like they're closer than expected. Zenabou stiffened, forcing a laugh. Oh, auntie, you always have such wild ideas. But Peter wasn't laughing. His jaw tightened as he watched Zenabou and Ben exchange quick glances throughout the evening. Later, after the guests had left, Peter confronted them both in private. What was that tonight? He demanded, his voice low but sharp. You two need to be more careful. People are already talking. Zenabou felt a pang of guilt, while Ben shifted uncomfortably. We're just trying to keep things normal, Ben replied defensively. No one suspects anything. Peter sighed, rubbing his temples. That's what worries me. One slip-up, and everything falls apart. As Zenabou's due date approached, the strain on all three became unbearable. Peter grew increasingly distant, retreating into himself as doubts consumed him. He began questioning whether this arrangement had been worth it, even hinting at ending the charade altogether. One night, after another argument with Peter, Zenabou sought refuge in Ben's apartment. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed her fears. I don't know how much longer I can do this, Ben. The lies, the secrets, it's suffocating. Ben pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Then let's stop lying to ourselves and to Peter. We can't keep living like this. But what about the baby? Zenabou whispered, her voice breaking. What happens to our child if we tell the truth? Ben hesitated, unsure of the answer. For the first time, they both realized the magnitude of the mess they'd created, and the impossibility of untangling it without consequences. The day of the baby's birth arrived, bringing a mix of joy and anxiety. Zenabou delivered a healthy baby boy, and Peter stood proudly by her side, posing for photos with their newborn. To the outside world, they were the picture-perfect family. But behind closed doors, the cracks were widening. That night, as Zenabou cradled her son, she found herself staring at his tiny features, searching for traces of Ben in his face. Guilt and love warred within her, leaving her emotionally drained. Later, as Peter slept, Zenabou received a text from Ben. How are you holding up? Need me? Her fingers hovered over the reply button, torn between duty and desire. Before she could respond, another message came through. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Always. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the screen. What should she do? Should she confess everything to Peter and risk losing him, or continue living a lie to protect their fragile family? What would you do if you were in Zenabou's shoes? Should she reveal the truth and face the fallout, or keep the secret buried forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think happens next.